Okay, so you're a tenant and you'd like to release your property, maybe make a bit of a profit. Stay tuned. Subletting.
I'm the ringleader, so listen up.
Hey,
How are ya?
Oh, man, I'm good. I'm good. I was just telling you, I'm a bit chilly this morning, man. I've got to stop being a sook, but it's like, can't keep up with this weather, man. I say it every weekend.
16 degrees. Pretty bit of chill in the air. I love it.
A bit of chilling, it gets you going. Oh, this convo will warm me up, you know. Gotta love our Sensei Saturdays together. So here we are. This
Saturdays. Now you've done a couple of relets this week where some tenants have made off with some cash like bandits, and we thought it would probably not a widely spoken about thing in the industry, where people are tenants of a property, decide to lease part or all of the property that they're actually leasing, and make some money.
I know. And it's like you said, it's not something that's spoken about very often. I think it's something that a lot of people don't know that you can do. It's not a question that really gets asked. I think you feel as a tenant, of course you're obligated to the agreement that you've made with the landlord. But in saying that, with times that we've had that have been, pretty tough, if you've not been able to really optimize the space that you're in, you're probably wondering yourself, shit, I've been here for how many years? I don't want to lose the traction that I've already created at this site. What can I do to retain it? And what can I do to keep myself going? And so there's some examples we can look at.
Business models can change. Hey, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you make, as a business, then you're making more money than ever, but you just don't need that space because your model's changing.
Absolutely. That's a really cool way to look about it. It's not always a negative thing. It can be a positive thing where it's just like, okay, clearly identified that, for instance, you're in a 50 square meter sized property, and you're just like, wow, I think I can just even downgrade the size, go to about 30. What do I do with this extra 20 square meters? And, for some, 20 square meters might just sound like a joke. It's not enough space, double garage size kind of space. And then you're like, no, there are people that really could utilize it to the best of their ability. And it can go into different routes and avenues. Now, if we explore some options, and option number one, I'd say the pandemic took an incredible hit on office spaces, sites that were completely dominated by, consult rooms, small little areas of, just to do, almost treated like hot desk spaces and things like that. And let's say that and I'm not going to draw on actual examples. I'm not going to say names or anything, but looking at a site, let's say a medical site, and you're like, wow, I've gone from having all this stuff and utilizing all these consult rooms and I can't do anything with them now. You're a tenant. What do I do? What can I do? The beauty of it is having that open conversation with a landlord, whether it be that it's privately managed, run, or it's then being managed by an agency. You can bring up the option of saying, hey, can I sublet the other areas that aren't being utilized?
Okay,
so,
can we start right from the top? What is subletting?
Okay, we start from very top. We keep it real simple. So subletting, if you're the head tenant of a lease, let's say, doesn't have to be commercial, can be residential as well. And there's obviously additional space that you can't utilize or you don't require anymore. You can look to have those areas then leased out separately.
Can be the whole space.
Can be the whole space too, if you really wanted it to. Absolutely.
So basically it's a lease that sits below the lease. Yeah. So, and I guess that when you're subletting, you don't want to be a muppet and have different terms to the original lease. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, go on.
Huge.
huge. I'd say and for people that have probably just joined in now and are watching this at the moment, so we're on the topic of subletting, and we were just branching off there onto obviously being a head tenant, and then obviously expanding out, probably having some or the whole space being leased out. You'd want to have the terms mirrored onto the other tenant or tenants that are going to be in that lease. Yeah, I think it's pretty crucial. You don't want it to be too different, too diverse, to overcomplicate things. I think if the one contract or the one agreement's worked for the primary space, it could roll the same with any other tenant or tenants that would utilize it as well.
Does a landlord get the shits when you sublet when you're a tenant and you sublet your property to another tenant? Does the actual landlord crack the shits?
You know what? No, they wouldn't get the shits. And why? It's because as long as they're getting their rent paid, they're happy. But most of the time, what I feel it comes down to is just you've got to ask the question. You don't want to go about doing these things without opening your mouth and saying something. I think it's let's be transparent and let's go about doing it the right way. Too many rules in property.
Too many. And I think also as a landlord, like particularly with the commercial property, there's probably not that much wear and tear. But with a residential property, as long the subletting, is a factor if there's excess wear and tear on the property. But generally, there's not. And I guess we've even seen examples where people have rented property, and the tenant who's rented the property has Airbnb'd the property and made a business of it, and made a lot of money from it. Now, the great thing about that is the tenant made the property beautiful because Airbnb's got to be looking sexy. But the bad news is when you're launching in and launching out so many people of a property, there's excess wear and tear. So I think there's lots of examples where subletting can be great or not so great, but it's all about working together and working it out. Now, you've had a cracker one lately where we won't give an address out, but the tenant was paying for a pretty low rent for a whole premises, and basically came to you and said, "Mate, I don't want to give up this premises because the rent's just so good, but can you do something with this area?" And you found some awesome tenants for it. The guy's not profiting out of it, but he's getting pretty close to paying a pretty low.
Yeah, and look, that's the beauty of when you can start to establish these relationships with your clients and with different tenants, and you grow fairly compassionate over the business that they've grown over the past how many years. The space has done them really well, and they're just like, I just need a bit of guidance. That's what they're looking for, guidance, a little bit of a helping hand to say, hey, what can I do? Can I rent the other space out? Can I make use of the other space with someone else? And it's, when you look at it in hindsight, it's a win-win for everyone, and that's exactly what happened in this given situation. And it's more or less almost the same style of business operating in the one space cohesively, and that's amazing. It's when it can be cohesive as well. That's another thing. You can go about wanting to sublet, and there's there could be a range of different problems that can arise if two parties don't see eye to eye. But generally, you're seeing if this party, the head tenant, has someone that they know, and then you go about exploring that option. And if it works, happy days, which it did in this case.
How much does it cost to sublet a property for a tenant to find another tenant?
What would it cost you? Anything? The interest.
So you work for free?
No, I don't work for free. But it's a matter of, obviously, when we're going about the trouble of finding someone, especially if it's being sourced out for us. But obviously, when it comes to putting an agreement together, when it's mirroring the original agreement, I don't feel that obviously overcomplicates things enough to warrant such a high expense.
So how much do you charge to find another tenant for the sublet of property?
Look, dollar figure wise, interesting to say. I mean, when it comes to generating a lease, when it comes to generating that client, I wouldn't say it's exactly the same as what we charge to find the whole new tenant for a space. Especially we've got to ensure as well that the tenant that we're putting in, is it mirroring the same length of time that that other tenant's going to be in the space for. That's always another thing to gauge what would obviously be charging or pricing that to be.
So just as a reference for someone who's not going to sublet a property, what are they going to pay?
Okay, look, if we're gonna go down the route of exploring what it would cost to go down putting in, let's say a lease agreement, obviously subject to if you're going to be exploring going through an agency, and an agency could charge you, anywhere from $250 to $500 to put a lease together, an in-house lease. Yep. Obviously, going to a solicitor, they could charge you anywhere from $1,000 to a couple grand. I don't think it needs to be so complicated that it warrants the same price of a whole new lease, but it is going through the right procedures and the right contractual agreement so it reflects correctly, because at the end of the day, the head tenant, which is the primary tenant in the case of wanting to sublet that space out, they will in essence take responsibility for that new tenant going in.
And I think it's actually cheap. If you're paying 50 grand a year on rent, someone that's going to pay 30 grand off your rent, it's actually, if you're sharing with an agent a small portion of that one-off payment, but it's not a week, it's forever. It's actually not expensive. And you're going to be making it, you're going to turn a huge profit on your business just after your Definitely. Obviously, we never do things for free. It doesn't work like that at all. It's just giving you a bit of more of just a general sense of it doesn't need to be complicated or overly expensive exercise to explore, but it's definitely one that one can explore both in a residential sense and obviously in a commercial sense. But obviously, when it comes to then going down the route of changing the property or applying a little bit of a fit out, then it comes down to obviously that new tenant's responsibility to get those things on the way. A tenant to then be referring back to the landlord or an owner to see if that's acceptable. So everyone needs to work together in order to make something like this work. It can't be just one party going over the other. So there's been some huge examples where we've let out massive warehouses, 2,000 metre squares, 1,000 metre squares, to 1,500, 1,500. There's also little examples where there's been accountancy offices where they haven't used a board one or two desks, 150 a week or whatever. You rented out the desk. So something happens on a large scale, subletting happens on a small scale, depending on the type of subject.
Yeah, definitely. And you almost think, oh God, which one's more difficult to do? Interestingly enough, I think that the bigger the space, it's a little bit more easier because you can see it as a whole and divvy up certain areas and see what works. I love an example, not going to say specific, but the areas such as Brookvale, when you've got real awesome industrial site, you've got a lot of areas that are warehouse and hard stand dominant. I'd say probably more hard stand. And when I say hard stand, I mean, the concrete area at the front that you can utilize to either park cars, you can basically store trucks, the works. It's great when you can see two people align themselves. One person uses X area, let's say the warehouse, the other uses the hard stand, concrete area, and you treat one area of that property to be common area. So they've got access to both. It doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't hurt the landlord. Everyone's happy.
Can be where businesses collaborate. So pretty cool. Like if you're a barber, for instance, you deal with tattoo artists or a nail technician or something, or you're a hairdresser and a nail technician or sublet. An agent can finance a business to manage your business as well. So it's not necessarily out of your control to choose with your sublet and your property. You want through an agent like us, we can find a tenant for you. You have the end decision on that person that really don't my business. I love it. Or stuff like that.
Absolutely. again, it's all about a really good collaboration. That's what we're trying to find when these sorts of things come up. Different, of course, when it comes to residential property, but at the same time, it's about finding that healthy relationship that two people can generate from obviously exploring that option. But I do really get a kick out of it when it comes to commercial, because not that it makes my job harder, it just makes my job more interesting. And it opens up different avenues, and it comes up, for instance, people that were initially looking for short-term options, which then say, hey, it worked out really well here, I'm sure it can work really well in the long run somewhere else. So it builds for a longer relationship to explore.
And that is subletting properties at a profit. And I think we've unpacked that well. Commercial in particular, residential takeaways are cost of life. It's the same a regular estate to do it. You don't need a sublet gain and you can turn business not to profit subletting.
Absolutely. Mark, pleasure as always. Thank you for everyone that's joined us. We had some good numbers in this morning. I like it. It's exciting to see people get keen.
Awesome. Have a great day. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.